Welcome to Virtual Church on the 2nd of July and our last instalment, I'm afraid, of the story of Joseph. I hope you've enjoyed following the ups and downs of his life and especially his relationship with his brothers. Well, last time we saw Joseph and the brothers finally, at least apparently, reconciled to one another. And so the story goes on how he sends back to the promised land to bring his father Jacob, and how they're given a great part of Egypt to live in, how Joseph's father, his father Jacob, lives out the last of his days there, enjoying the honor and respect that's given to him by Joseph and to all the others. But finally he dies there. And we come now to the problems that arise when the father, Jacob, dies. Because it seems that the brothers don't really believe that Joseph has forgiven them. They seem to feel that he's only acting out of respect for their father and perhaps a bit also for the youngest brother, Benjamin. And so here's the story. We've now gone ahead several chapters to chapter 50, the last chapter of Genesis, and I'm looking at verse 15. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "What if Joseph holds a grudge against us? What if he pays us back for all the wrongs we did to him?" So they sent word to Joseph saying, "Your father left these instructions before he died. This is what you're to say to Joseph. I ask you to forgive your brothers the sins and the wrongs they committed in treating you so badly. Now please forgive the sins of the servants of the God of your father." When the message came to him, Joseph wept. His brothers then came and threw themselves down before him. "We are your slaves," they said. But Joseph said to them, "Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then don't be afraid. I'll provide for you and your children." And he reassured them and spoke kindly to them. Well, that's such an interesting thing, isn't it? That Joseph has forgiven his brothers, but his brothers have not forgiven themselves for what they did. And so often I find this in pastoral ministry, that people are unable to forgive themselves, even sometimes when they believe in the forgiveness of God and believe that they have the forgiveness of people that they've harmed. The brothers sadly decide to deal with this by making up a cock and bull story. Oh, he respects our dad. Let's make up some things that our dad might have said, and beg for the forgiveness we don't actually believe we've received. Not in our own name, because we don't deserve it, but in our dad's name. They're still trying to manipulate Joseph. They're still being manipulated themselves by guilt. Well, when Joseph receives their story, he weeps. This is actually the 7th time that we find Joseph weeping in the story. Sometimes secretly he's overcome with his emotions. Sometimes it's because they're finally reconciled. This 7th time. Nothing hurts like a family, does it? Nothing can bring you greater joy and satisfaction in life. Nothing can bring more pain when it goes wrong. His brothers still don't get him. They don't understand him. This weeping shows, doesn't it, that all that he's been through, the imprisonment and the enslavement and the hardship and the rejection, has actually softened his heart instead of hardening it. his brothers still don't get it. And his brothers actually fulfill his original dream here. Do you remember that dream at the start when he was a rather obnoxious 17-year-old? You'll all be bowing down to me. They're bowing down to him now because they think this mighty Prime Minister of Egypt, now that their father is out of the way, will take his revenge if they don't have this story to hide behind. They just don't get him at all. But they're bowing down to him, but Joseph doesn't want it. He doesn't need it anymore. He just wishes his brothers would understand that he now has a heart for them. That obnoxious 17-year-old has grown. And our sufferings as we go through life, maybe even the ones in this current pandemic, can do one of two things to us. They can shrink us. They can make us hard, bitter, small-minded, focused on just ourselves and our own hurts, wanting revenge. But in Joseph, it softened him. And it's actually made him stronger. Can you see that the Joseph who forgives his brothers is a stronger, bigger person than the one who, in another story, might have harbored revenge and taken the opportunity, now that his father's gone, to exact it on the brothers who treated him so badly. So then Joseph speaks to his brothers. Am I in the place of God? He says. It's not my place to judge you. That is so big-hearted of Joseph, because of course they'd judged him, counted him unworthy, and thrown his life away at the start of the story. He's got a bigger perspective and a bigger view, and he is leaving these matters now for God to work out. He says, you meant this for evil, but God meant it for good, the saving of many lives. Yes, I did this to save your lives through God's goodness to us. He's looking for a bigger purpose. He's got a bigger outlook on life. He sees that the rescue of his brothers and all their families and children who now joined them, 70, with all their children and so on, their families that have come with them. God was working out something for all of them, not just for Joseph personally. And he promises them he'll continue to support them. He'll provide for them and will look after their children. So Joseph has really grown through his sufferings. Maybe we can grow through ours sometimes. Maybe we can make sure they don't make us smaller, wrapped up in ourselves, pitying ourselves as we sometimes do. I know that's a big thing for me that I have to fight. Or they can make us bigger, because we become more aware of the sufferings and sorrows of others, just as Judah had become more aware of what he'd done to Joseph, of his father's love for Benjamin, of all the things that made Judah step forward in our last episode and say, take me, don't take our brother Benjamin, it'll kill our father. And Joseph also shows that he has grown. So what about us? We've got to the end of Joseph's story here, and he's able to look back over all that's happened and see God's purposes and see how God had actually used him through all his sorrow and suffering and pain to bring deliverance and life to other people, to provide a refuge for them in a time of great famine. but we're still in the middle of our story. We don't actually know how things are going to turn out. What will be the outcome of, for example, the current pandemic, the shielding with all its isolation and loneliness, and some depression for some of us that goes with those circumstances. At the very least, let's see, if we can, that God has an outcome for us. That because we are in the middle of our story, we can look forward, we can look ahead to God who also has the end of our story in his hands, and who, even if we can't see what that end is, will bring about some good purpose for us through it all. So I think that's the cue for us to pray. Should we bow our heads for a moment? Yes, Lord, it is hard for us to be in the midst of our story, not to know how things are going to work out, not to yet have the perspective that comes from looking back, and to see that you have been meaning things for good, even when at times they've been hard and painful for us. O Lord, you who see the end from the beginning, help us to trust you through these difficult times, and help us as we look to you not to become small and hard and bitter, but to be softened and to open our hearts. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Now, before we leave virtual church today, I'd like to say we'll be having Tim Keller as our guest speaker tomorrow, so I hope you've been enjoying his ministry. But while I take my day off, I've been looking into the material that's just come out about reopening churches for public worship. A whole lot came out from the government at the start of this week, and then the Church of England, well, a whole lot more came out from them, and we only got hold of that yesterday. And looking through all the complexities of it, it's become clear to me that sadly we will not be able to open the church for public worship this Sunday. I'm really sorry about this, but it's important that when we open, we do so without risk to people entering the public, and we need to make sure that we put in all the things, we put them all into place that we've been asked to put into place, so that that can happen safely. I am in very good hope, though, that with the help of the wardens and Church Council, we will be open on Sunday the 12th of July. So I'm looking forward to that very much. Just to say, though, that if you're shielding, if you're vulnerable in any way, the advice that we've been given is very strongly that please don't take a risk coming to church if that would be a risk for you. So God bless you, and see you in the next church after our visit from Tim Keller.